The Supreme Court has agreed to hear a case which is trying to slap down Obamacare again. This one is over the subsidy system set up under the law. And if this news makes you scared, it should, because this is the most credible threat to Obamacare yet, in my opinion. And there's no telling how the Supreme Court is going to rule on this. Last time, in the last Obamacare hearing, we squeaked by and won, but this could go either way. And we actually warned you on Secular Talk about this case a few months ago. And I was crossing my fingers at the time, and I was hoping that the Supreme Court wouldn't pick the case up, because I knew that if they picked it up, oh boy, now it's a 50-50 proposition as to whether or not Obamacare will get gutted again. So they did pick it up. Bloomberg explains, quote, "The legal dispute centers on a 4-word statutory phrase. The law says people qualify for tax credits when they buy insurance on an online marketplace established by the state. Those words are significant because only 14 states have set up their own marketplaces known as exchanges. The rest have left the job to the federal government as the law permits. The question is whether people can collect the subsidies even if they buy policies on a federal exchange." So do you understand what that means? That's very important. They're taking these 4 words, quote, established by the state. Again, in the law, what it says is you can buy health insurance, you could get health care if you're using the marketplace, quote, established by the state. So what the conservatives are saying is, no, you guys misinterpreted the law all along. When it says established by the state, they mean any of the individual states. So therefore, only the states that set up their own insurance exchanges are legally using Obamacare. All the other states where people go directly to the federal exchange, that's not the way the law was intended to be used. So in every other state except those 14 states, the law is null and void. It doesn't apply. People are using it wrong. And those subsidies that the federal government are giving to the people through the federal exchanges are not allowed. So this is a clear case of these guys trying to gut Obamacare. And like I said, they might win. Now, that's their argument. The counter argument is the word state doesn't just apply to actual states like the 50 states. You refer to you could refer to a country as a state, absolutely. So the idea that the federal government doesn't count as much as the state governments, that's silly. But also, more importantly, the reason why all the other states didn't set up their state exchanges and the federal government had to is because of a different Supreme Court case when they said, hey, this is optional. It's optional for you to set up your own your own system. So because of the previous Supreme Court decision, that's now affecting this Supreme Court decision. This is what they did with the Medicaid expansion, too. They said, okay, the Supreme Court said now that's optional. It wasn't optional in the original law, but then the Supreme Court slapped down parts of it and said, no, that's optional. You can choose whether or not to opt into the Medicaid expansion. So because of a decision made by the court before, they're now branching off of that decision, and they might use their previous decision to smack down the entire law. Now, if there's any saving grace for the law, this is what it is. Quote, under a rule issued by the Internal Revenue Service, consumers can claim tax credits no matter where they live. The Obama administration says the IRS approach is consistent with the law's aims. So, in other words, even if you have this argument over the wording of the law and, you say established by the state means only the actual states, not the federal government. And you could argue over that, right? But even if you do, okay, it doesn't matter which side wins that argument because there's this other aspect, which is an IRS, a rule issued by the IRS, which clarified and said, no, yeah, you could get your subsidies in any state, even if your particular state did not set up a state exchange. So this should be a non-issue. In all seriousness, they probably shouldn't have accepted the case. I had a different opinion on this a while ago, but the more I read about this case, I think, oh my God, they really shouldn't have accepted this. They should have dismissed it. But they did accept it, which again is a giant red flag. We don't know how this is going to go. This may be It may be the end of Obamacare. Okay, they said we're expecting a ruling in June, I think. So cross your fingers. It's going to have to dodge a bullet and survive again. And every time I hear about stuff like this, I always get so disheartened because we have progressives and liberals who push this country in a much better direction, a much more sane direction, just a more civilized direction. And then at every turn, we have conservatives trying to drag us back to being barbarians and being savages. Like, really? This is what we're going to do. We're going to go back to the system we had before Obamacare. You do know that 45,000 people died every year because they didn't have access to basic health care before Obamacare, right? You do know that, right? And over a weird wording that maybe or maybe doesn't mean the thing that you think it means, you're going to possibly smack down the entire law and sentence 45,000 people to death because you're ideologues and because you want this to be an uber-conservative country. No, it's so annoying and it's so backwards, and this is what we've seen throughout history. We always have liberals come along and they push us in a better direction, and then conservatives try to drag us back. Liberals come along, they push us in a better direction, and then conservatives try to drag us back. Step the fuck aside. If you look at history, it's a litany of liberals being right about everything and conservatives being wrong about everything. And you have to understand, history views you as absolute clowns and morons. And this is no different right here.